He paid for a VIP seat like everyone else, until a flight attendant told him to move for someone more important. What happened next made headlines across the country. Darius Colton just wanted to go home. He wasn't thinking about policies or politics or making a statement. He was thinking about his bed, his kids, and whether he had enough time to pick up barbecue from that little place off Lyndale before it closed. His keynote at the Minneapolis Tech Futures Conference had gone better than expected. Tight crowd, standing ovation, even a few handshakes from investors afterward. But now, as he rolled his carry-on through Terminal 1 at MSP, he just wanted quiet. His VIP boarding pass felt like a small reward. A window seat, a little extra legroom, early boarding, nothing special. He'd paid for it like anybody else. And after 3 days of networking and talking, it was going to be his first real moment of peace. Darius was a tall man, built like a former linebacker who now spent more time behind screens than weights. His beard had gone silver around the edges, but his eyes still held the sharp focus of someone who'd had to work twice as hard for half the recognition early in his career. Charlotte was home now, but he'd spent years bouncing between cities, contracts, and short-term housing just to build the kind of stability that people around him now took for granted. He didn't wear expensive suits or try to impress anyone. That day, it was jeans, a sport coat, and a comfortable pair of sneakers. He'd long learned that power didn't always look like power. Sometimes it just looked like a man minding his business in seat 2A. The first sign that something was off came before takeoff. He was scrolling through emails when a flight attendant approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She leaned in slightly, voice low but clear. "Mr. Colton, we have a small request. One of our frequent flyers is seated toward the back. He's asked if you'd be willing to switch seats with him." Darius looked up, confused. "I'm sorry. Why?" She hesitated. "He's part of our loyalty program, and it's a preferred request. He was expecting an upgrade. There seems to have been a mix-up." Darius glanced around. The cabin was half full. He wasn't being asked to move to another VIP seat. She was pointing toward row 24. He gave a polite smile. "I'd prefer to keep my seat, thanks. I paid for this one." The attendant's lips tightened just slightly. "Of course. I'll let the team know." He thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't. 5 minutes later, another crew member came by, this time a senior flight attendant. Her tone was less friendly. "Sir, we understand you declined to switch seats, but unfortunately we're going to need you to move. It's a company policy when there's a seating conflict with executive-level passengers." Darius blinked. "Executive level? Is he staff?" "No, but he's part of our premium loyalty tier. We're asking for your cooperation." He kept his voice calm. "I booked this seat, paid for it days ago. There wasn't any mention of a conflict until now. Passengers nearby were starting to notice." "Sir," she said again, quieter now, "we can offer you a complimentary drink and a $75 travel voucher for the inconvenience." "So, I'm being asked to move because this person is more important to your airline?" She didn't answer. Darius sighed, took a breath, and leaned back. "I'm not moving." The attendant didn't argue. She simply nodded once and walked away. But 5 minutes later, a third staff member showed up, this time with a small clipboard and a forced smile. No explanation, no eye contact, just, "Mr. Colton, please gather your things. You've been reassigned to seat 24B. No warning, no choice. Darius looked at her, then back at the seat he had paid for. His chest felt tight, not from anger, but from disbelief. Not a single apology this time, just procedure. He stood up slowly, every movement watched. The walk down the aisle was the worst part, eyes pretending not to look. Some didn't bother pretending. A younger woman in 12C whispered, "That's not right." An older man gave him a nod of what might have been sympathy, or maybe guilt. But Darius didn't say a word. He placed his bag in the overhead bin above 24B, took his seat, and looked out the window. But somewhere behind him, a phone camera was still recording. Seat 24B was wedged between a young guy in basketball shorts and an elderly woman who kept asking if this was the flight to St. Louis. Darius didn't answer. He stared straight ahead, trying to keep the heat in his chest from rising to his face. He'd experienced worse things in life: rudeness, bias, disrespect. But something about this felt different, because it was so casual, so polished, so rehearsed. The man who took his seat was maybe late 40s, business casual, salt and pepper hair, and a tan polo shirt that still had the tags tucked under the collar. He wasn't just confident. He looked like someone who always got what he asked for, no matter who it inconvenienced. The man never even looked back. Not once. It wasn't the first time Darius had been made to feel small in a place where he was supposed to belong. But this wasn't a private club or boardroom where things happened behind closed doors. This was a commercial airline, a seat, a transaction. Something every working person in America could relate to. Darius pulled out his phone, not to tweet, not to call anyone, just to distract himself. But even then he could hear them. Row 22. Quiet murmuring. "I think they moved that guy." "Yeah, I saw." "That was weird, right?" "He paid for that seat." I heard him say it. The man next to Darius glanced over. "That was messed up, man." Darius didn't respond. He wasn't ready to make this a scene. He wasn't ready to be the guy people clapped for after standing up to something. He just wanted to fly home. But then the plane started moving, and he felt something shift, not in the air, but in the atmosphere between people. The discomfort had spread. Meanwhile, 2 rows ahead, a teenager who had watched the entire interaction was editing video on her phone. Her name was Janie Ruiz, 16, visiting her aunt in Charlotte. She hadn't meant to record it. At first, it was just for fun. She liked filming clips for her stories. But when she saw the flight attendant lean in and ask that man to move, something told her to hit record. Now, with the in-flight Wi-Fi active, she uploaded the video to TikTok and wrote 4 words underneath. He paid for it. No hashtags, no dramatic music, just the raw footage. It spread fast. Back in 24B, Darius still hadn't looked at his phone. He was trying to let it go. He closed his eyes, thought about his daughter's science project, his son's basketball tryouts, the shoes he promised to fix for his wife. Real things, normal things. But even from the back, he could hear the clink of glasses up front. Hear the man in 2A ordering sparkling water like it had been waiting for him. The flight attendants were extra cheerful now, cracking jokes, asking if he needed anything else. When Darius opened his eyes again, the flight was in full cruise. He turned his phone over and finally noticed the notifications. 3 missed calls. 2 texts from his colleague. "Man, you trending." He frowned. He clicked the link she sent him. There he was, on video. Clear audio. The moment the flight attendant said company policy. The way he replied, calm and steady. "I paid for this seat." The quiet shake of his head. The comments underneath came in waves. "So we still doing this in 2025? This man handled it better than I would have. He deserves every dime back. And then some. Airbright Airlines. Seriously?" He stared at the screen, stunned. Not angry. Not even hurt. Just surprised. The internet had taken what felt like a personal humiliation and turned it into something louder. The flight was still mid-air, but people on the ground were already calling for heads to roll. One comment stuck with him, though, more than the others. It wasn't flashy or emotional, just simple. "Why do we keep pretending this is okay?" He locked his phone and leaned back again. The man beside him, same one in basketball shorts, nudged his elbow. "People got your back. You should speak out." Darius gave a slow exhale. "Maybe. We'll see." But what he didn't know was that a producer at WGN Chicago had already forwarded the video to their editor, and by the time the wheels touched down, things were already spiraling out of the airline's control. The plane touched down at Midway just after 6:30 p.m. Clear skies, smooth landing. To most passengers, it was the end of a short, uneventful flight. But not to Darius. As the plane taxied toward the gate, he noticed more glances than usual. Subtle ones. a few passengers looking over their shoulders, someone in the aisle ahead whispering into their phone. The teenager from earlier, Janie, stood up just enough to spot him, then quickly sat back down. She didn't look guilty. She looked concerned. Darius powered off airplane mode and braced himself. His phone buzzed so hard it slipped off his lap. There were text messages from old co-workers he hadn't spoken to in years, emails from reporters, a LinkedIn message from someone at the Chicago Tribune. And then there were the headlines, dozens of them. One stood out, pinned to the top of his screen by an app notification. Black passenger removed from VIP seat on Airbright flight. Video sparks outrage. He read it twice. Another headline followed seconds later. Passenger downgraded mid-flight due to loyalty policy. Airlines scrambles for answers. Darius didn't know whether to laugh or throw up. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's life happen. Except it was him. His voice. His face. The seatbelt sign dinged off. The man in basketball shorts looked over. "Yo, you see this?" Darius nodded. "Yeah. You good?" "I will be." The line to exit was moving slow. A few rows ahead, a middle-aged woman with a beige tote bag turned to glance at him. Then another. Then a man in a Hawaiian shirt raised his phone. He wasn't even being subtle about it. He was recording. Darius turned away, suddenly uncomfortable. As he reached the front of the plane, where VIP passengers usually deboarded first, he paused. That same crew, 3 attendants, including the one who first asked him to move, stood quietly at the galley. None of them looked at him. He stopped in front of them, not to cause a scene, just to look each one in the eyes. But they didn't return it. He stepped off the plane. Inside the terminal, it only took 5 minutes before someone approached. A young man in a red hoodie, maybe 20, maybe younger. Nervous energy. "Mr. Colton?" Darius blinked. "Yeah? I just wanted to say, I saw the video. What they did, that wasn't right. Thank you. For not yelling or anything. You handled it better than I would have." Darius gave a small nod. "Appreciate that." The kid looked like he wanted to say more, but just stepped back into the crowd. Darius walked through the terminal slowly, a carry-on in one hand, phone buzzing non-stop in the other. The flight was over, but the attention was just beginning. By the time he reached the exit, another email popped up. This one was from someone at Airbright Corporate. It wasn't long. Just a generic message. "We're aware of your experience on Flight 624. A representative will be reaching out. We value your feedback." He didn't bother replying. Outside, he called a rideshare. While he waited, he sat on a bench near the passenger pickup, staring at the last thing he wanted to see, his own face, on a stranger's phone screen just across from him. Someone was watching the video again, mouth slightly open. The man noticed him. Their eyes met. He lowered the phone awkwardly and turned away. But it was too late. This wasn't just a personal moment anymore. It had already gone public. By the next morning, Darius's name was everywhere. It was on breakfast shows, news websites, and Twitter threads stacked 20 comments deep. But it wasn't just the clip anymore. It was the story. People were digging into the airline's policies, talking about how loyalty tiers were often used to excuse poor treatment. The internet wasn't just angry, it was organized. Darius woke up to 142 unread messages and 5 missed calls. 2 were from numbers labeled unknown. One was from a local Chicago station. Another from a woman named Monique Glass, senior producer at a national morning show. He rubbed his face, groggy. Then he checked his email. There it was. Subject line: "Good morning from CNN. We'd love to speak with you today if you're open to it." He let the phone fall on the comforter. In the kitchen of his hotel suite, the coffee brewed slowly. His hands weren't shaking, but he felt like he was carrying something heavy in his chest. All of this because he said no to giving up his seat. Across the country, the airline was scrambling. Airbright's public relations team posted a statement around 8 a.m. Eastern. "We are aware of the incident involving Mr. Colton on Flight 624. Airbright holds our guests in the highest regard, and we regret any experience that does not reflect our values. We are conducting an internal review and will take appropriate actions." It didn't land well. Thousands of comments poured in within minutes. "You regret the experience, not the action. What are airbright values? Humiliation. Where's the apology to him?" People weren't just criticizing. They were digging. Someone unearthed a handful of older complaints against the same airline. Similar language, similar dismissals. One of them was from 2019, where a young woman had been reassigned without notice due to a seating conflict, and her original seat was given to a man with VIP status. That post started circulating again, now side by side with Darius's story. Back in Chicago, Darius finally picked up the phone when Monique Glass called. "Mr. Colton, thank you for answering. I'll keep this brief. We saw the video. We understand this probably isn't how you planned your week. But if you're willing to speak to us, we'll give you the time and the space to tell your side." Darius was quiet. Then he asked, "If I speak, what do you expect me to say? Whatever feels right to you," Monique replied. "We're not trying to script you." He paused. "I don't want to be part of something performative. Understood. I'm not looking to start a war. But people deserve to know how normal this felt when it happened." Monique didn't try to convince him. She just said, "Let us know if you change your mind." He did, about an hour later. Not because he wanted attention, but because the messages kept pouring in. From strangers, parents, workers in other industries who said, "This happened to me too. I didn't say anything." One in particular hit hard. It was from a flight attendant, anonymous. "I've been told to do that before. Move someone less loyal for someone who spends more. It felt wrong. I've hated myself for it ever since. I'm sorry this happened to you." That night, Darius sat down in front of a small webcam, wore a dark shirt with no logos, and stared straight ahead. He cleared his throat, took a breath, then said quietly, "I want to talk about what happened to me on Flight 624. He didn't yell. He didn't name call. He just explained. How quickly it all went down. How calm everyone acted. How no one even considered what it would feel like to be removed, publicly, for no reason other than someone else had more loyalty points. I'm not here to get free tickets. I'm not looking for revenge, he said. But I do think it's important to ask, how many people get treated like this and don't have a camera nearby? The video wasn't long, just under 4 minutes, but it hit hard. By morning, it had 6.3 million views and counting. It was a strange thing, going viral. Darius had never wanted attention. He preferred the background, the quiet work, the slow climb, the small wins. But now, his voice was being played in waiting rooms, on car radios, during office lunch breaks. People were quoting his line, "How many people get treated like this and don't have a camera nearby?" Like it came from a movie. But he wasn't playing a role. He was just telling the truth. The morning after his video dropped, producers flooded his inbox with interview requests. Every outlet wanted him. Some offered travel, others hinted at brand partnerships or long-term collaborations. He ignored most of them. He only agreed to 2 interviews, one with a local Chicago news station and one with NPR. He wanted the conversation to be real, not polished for drama, not squeezed into sound bites. Sitting across from the Chicago host, he wore the same calm expression he'd had in the video. Hands folded, posture relaxed, eyes steady. The host leaned in gently. "Mr. Colton, a lot of people are calling you a symbol. A hero, even. How do you feel about that?" Darius almost smiled. "I feel like I got kicked out of a seat I paid for. That doesn't make me a hero. That makes me human." He paused for a second. "I think the only reason this story caught fire is because it's familiar. Everyone's had a moment like that. A moment where you're told, without anyone saying it directly, that you don't belong in a space you've earned." The host was quiet. Then Darius added, "And the part that sticks with me? No one apologized. Not really. No one said, 'Hey, we messed up.' They just followed a script. Smiles, procedure, vouchers, but they never saw me. That clip aired within hours. It didn't scream, it didn't accuse, it didn't even mention race explicitly. But it hit harder than anything the airline had released. It was authentic, and that made it powerful. Meanwhile, inside Air Bright's headquarters in San Diego, things were heating up. Executives held emergency meetings. Legal counsel was called. PR teams drafted and scrapped multiple statements. Internally, some argued they needed to issue a public apology. Others were worried it would admit fault. Stockholders were already panicking. What finally pushed them over the edge wasn't a lawsuit or a celebrity post. It was the sheer volume of everyday people sharing their own stories. One woman posted about being forced to give up her seat during a cross-country flight because a preferred traveler requested to sit next to his colleague. She was 8 months pregnant at the time. A middle-aged man commented that he'd been downgraded 3 years ago, quietly, no explanation, after a frequent flyer showed up late to the gate. Stories poured in by the hundreds. Some were worse. Some were subtle. But the message was clear. This wasn't rare. It was routine. Darius read them all. He didn't respond to every message, but he saw them, and for the first time in a while, he didn't feel alone in the experience. He was invited to speak at a roundtable hosted by the Department of Transportation. Representatives from multiple airlines were present. When his turn came, he stood up slowly, took a breath, and told them exactly what had happened. Not for sympathy, but for clarity. I'm not asking you to like me. I'm asking you to listen. Because if you don't, it's going to happen again. And next time, it might not be caught on camera. After the panel, one of the attendees approached him. A young staffer from a different airline. She spoke softly. I just wanted to say thank you. I've been in the industry 3 years. We see this kind of thing. More than we admit. Darius nodded. Then what are you doing about it? She looked down. Trying. But Darius was no longer trying. He was moving. And the airline was about to feel it. The fallout came faster than anyone expected. By Thursday afternoon, just 4 days after the flight, Air Bright Airlines issued a second statement. This time it was direct. No vague regrets, no PR padding. We sincerely apologize to Mr. Darius Colton. Our internal investigation has confirmed that protocol was misapplied, and we take full responsibility for the mistreatment he experienced on Flight 624. We are terminating the flight crew involved, effective immediately, and are implementing new mandatory training procedures across all tiers of staff. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. The headlines followed quickly. Air Bright fires flight team following viral video. Airline revises loyalty policy after public backlash. Passenger downgraded for preferred flyer sparks industry-wide change. For the people on that flight, the news hit like a jolt. Janie Ruiz, the teenager who filmed the video, posted a second clip thanking Darius for speaking up. Most grown-ups would have just let it slide. He didn't. He spoke for people like me. Others started tagging him in their posts. New policies, new pledges, even internal memos that had leaked from other airlines now reevaluating priority seat reassignment procedures. Darius didn't reply to most. He didn't have to. He'd become something bigger than a headline. Back at Air Bright, tension was running high. The crew from Flight 624 had been removed. 2 attendants, the lead supervisor, and the gate agent who approved the last-minute seat reassignment. Their names weren't released publicly, but within industry circles, the message was clear. This wasn't going to be brushed aside. Behind closed doors, employees started speaking up. A whistleblower sent an anonymous letter to several news outlets, stating that Air Bright had quietly approved a loyalty override practice 2 years earlier, an unspoken guideline instructing staff to protect premium relationships, even if it meant reassigning paid passengers. Darius read the article late at night, in silence. His wife, Leona, sat beside him on the couch, scrolling through her own feed. She looked over. You okay? Yeah, he said. Just trying to make sense of all this. Leona reached for his hand. You didn't ask for any of it, but you handled it with grace. That matters. He looked at her, eyes tired but calm. I didn't even raise my voice. I know, she said. That's what scared them the most. That weekend, a national magazine published a feature titled, "A Seat Taken, How One Quiet Passenger Challenged an Industry." It opened with a full-page photo of Darius, not speaking into a microphone, not holding a sign, just sitting, back straight, eyes focused. Airbright's CEO was pressured into giving a live press conference. Reporters grilled him about the policy, the lack of accountability, the history of similar cases. We failed, the CEO admitted. And we are changing, not because we were forced to, but because we needed to. No one fully believed him. But even skeptics admitted it was rare to hear something that honest from a corporate executive. Other airlines felt the pressure. Delta, JetBlue, and Southwest each released statements affirming their commitment to transparent seating policies. Some even invited passengers to submit stories of past mistreatment, promising internal reviews. Meanwhile, Darius returned home. His kids didn't quite understand why people were calling him a hero. To them, he was still the dad who fixed breakfast, folded laundry unevenly, and couldn't figure out their smart TV. But even they sensed something had changed. His daughter, Ari, 11 years old, asked him one night, "Why did they make you move?" He paused. "Because they thought the other man was more important." "Were they right?" "No," he said. "But that's what they believed. And sometimes, if no one says anything, people keep believing things that aren't true." She nodded, then asked, "Is that why you talked on TV?" He smiled. "Yeah, I wanted people to think harder about what fairness really means." But it wasn't just a conversation anymore. Darius had sparked a movement that couldn't be quietly reassigned. 2 weeks after the flight, Darius received an email that caught him off guard. It wasn't from a news outlet or another talk show. It came from a man named Carlton Drew, a senior director at Horizon Mobility Group, the parent company of 3 major U.S. airlines, including Airbright. The subject line was simple: "We'd like to speak with you, off the record." Darius didn't answer right away. He stared at the message for a while, then closed his laptop. Something about it didn't sit right. He wasn't interested in being the face of a new campaign or shaking hands for photo ops. He wasn't trying to become a brand. He just wanted people to be treated right. But 2 days later, curiosity got the best of him. He called the number listed in the email. Carlton answered on the second ring. "Mr. Colton," the man said. "I appreciate you calling. I'll be quick. We've seen what you had to say. And some of us are listening. We'd like to invite you to consult with our leadership board on customer equity and internal accountability. Paid, of course. No strings attached. Just perspective. The kind we clearly don't have enough of." Darius said nothing at first. Then finally, "Why me? Because you told the truth. And people believed you. And what exactly do you want to change?" Carlton was quiet, then honest. "That's what we're still trying to figure out." Darius told him he'd think about it. Later that night, he sat on the porch at home, sipping tea while the streetlights flickered on. Leona joined him, curling her legs beneath her on the patio bench. He told her about the call. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think they're scared of more bad press." She shrugged. "Probably. But that doesn't mean you can't still help shape something better." He thought about that. Not just the offer, but the moment on that plane. How calm it had all seemed. How efficient. The way the flight attendant smiled while moving him out of his seat, like she was asking about a drink choice. He'd never forget that. But maybe, just maybe, he could make sure someone else wouldn't have to feel it. The next day, he emailed Carlton back. "I'll do it. On one condition." He asked that every session begin with a recorded, anonymous testimony from real passengers and crew. Stories, both good and bad. No branding. No edits. Just truth. Read out loud in the room before any meeting began. Carlton agreed. 2 weeks later, Darius sat in a boardroom in Dallas. 12 people in suits. A whiteboard full of stats. One of them asked if he thought the public had overreacted. He looked at her, calm but clear. "No, I think people were just waiting for an example they could finally see. They didn't ask that again. Over the next month, he helped draft what became known as the Seat Fairness Framework, a plain language policy that put limits on involuntary seat changes, regardless of loyalty tiers. It was eventually adopted by 2 more airlines and cited in an FAA policy review. None of it made him rich. He didn't want to cash in. He still wore his old watch, still drove the same hybrid sedan with the squeaky AC vent. But every now and then, he'd get a letter from someone. One came from a high school teacher in Missouri. She wrote, "I show your interview to my students when we talk about how small actions can mean big things. I tell them, you don't have to shout. Just stay where you are if you've earned that space." He kept that one taped inside his office desk. Darius didn't become famous. He didn't go on tour. He went back to work, back to family, back to his routine. But the next time he flew, booked in seat 1C on a quiet flight to Sacramento, he sat down, and no one asked him to move. The flight attendant came by with a smile. "Anything I can get you before takeoff, Mr. Colton?" He looked out the window for a second, then turned back to her. "No, thank you. I'm good right here, because sometimes sitting still is the most powerful thing you can do."